Hey Henry, well, we've made it to the last poem, okay? And I'm gonna help you through it. So this time, the way that I'm gonna do it is I'm gonna work through the whole poem since this is a little bit longer, and as things come up that I know you're going to need to know for either comprehension questions or like the logic questions, I'm going to make sure to go over those with you as I'm going through the poem, okay? So you may have to do some pausing the video to kind of work through things or re-watch as often as you need, okay? First of all, let's just say that this poem is different than what we've seen before. There's no real rhyming. There's nothing like that. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have rhythm, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But it's written definitely different than the Emily Dickinson poems and the other poem that he wrote, Fog, okay? So hopefully you've done the pre-grammar question. Hopefully you've read through the reading notes. Maybe done the words to be defined. I can't remember if that was yesterday or today's assignment, but hopefully you've worked through some of that. Maybe you've even read the poem. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read it, stopping to give you some information as we go, okay? Hog butcher for the world, tool maker, stacker of wheat. Player with railroads and the nation's freight handler, stormy, husky, brawling, city of the big shoulders. So I'm going to stop there after the first stanza, okay, because there's a whole lot we need to talk about. So first of all, I want to talk about the rhythm we hear there, okay? And maybe it's not extremely noticeable, but it kind of has a thumping or drumming rhythm. Hog butcher for the world, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads and the nation's freight handler, and I guess depending on how you would read it, but that's kind of, I think, what they're wanting you to get from that is it's kind of got this like thumping, this drumming, this kind of beat to it, okay? So that's the first thing. And we're going to see that later on in the one word lines that we get later in stanza 2. You're going to kind of hopefully hear that same sort of rhythm that is just this kind of tapping or thumping or drumming, however you want to say it, okay? The next thing that I want to talk about are things that Chicago contributes, okay? Sandberg definitely thinks that Chicago makes great contributions to the world, to the nation. And we know this because he says in the very first line, hog butcher for the world. Okay, so that would be something that Chicago contributes to the world. And then in the third line, where he says nation's freight handler. Okay, here, this is another great contribution that he is giving to Chicago. Okay, and that this is something that Chicago gives to the world and the nation. All right. Let's also talk a little bit about an epithet. So an epithet is a characterizing word occurring in the place of the name of a person, okay? And so it's sort of like calling the person for what they do in a way. And so here we've got hog butcher and tool maker, okay, which are examples of epithets. Okay. We also, in this first stanza, get his description of the type of people that are in Chicago. Okay. He thinks of them as sturdy, hardy, husky. He says city of the broad shoulders. Okay. And so he's talking about the physically sturdy people that are found in Chicago. Okay. That line, city of the big shoulders, is not only an example of a metaphor, okay, because it's comparing the people of the city with these broad shoulders, it's making that comparison, but it's also personification, okay, because the city is a thing. It's not a person, so it cannot have broad shoulders. So it's both a metaphor and it's personification. Okay? I think that's all for the first stanza. So there was a whole lot of information found in that first stanza. Okay? Now, starting in the second stanza, I'm going to read the first 4 lines, and then we're going to stop and take a moment, okay? They tell me you are wicked, and I believe them, for I have seen your painted women under the gas lamps luring the farm boys. And they tell me you are crooked, and I answer, yes, it is true. I have seen the gunman kill and go free to kill again. And they tell me you are brutal, and my reply is, on the faces of women and children I have seen the marks of wanton hunger. And having answered, so I turn once more to those who sneer at this my city, and I tell them back, and I give them back the sneer and say to them. Okay, so one of the first things that I want to talk about here is in these first few lines of the second stanza, Sandburg is addressing Chicago about its disreputable reputation. Okay? And with each charge, he begins the phrase by saying, they tell me. Okay? And the judgments here, are, they tell me you are wicked. They tell me you are crooked. They tell me you are brutal. Okay, so he's saying these are the charges that are being brought against Chicago. They are wicked, crooked, and brutal. Okay, now, he does not disagree with this. He actually acknowledges the criticisms, and he believes that they're true because he says, and I believe them, or I say yes, or, so he is acknowledging that these are very real concerns and that they are true. But he does manage to convince us that Chicago is still great, okay? And he does this, first of all, in the last line that I read, where he says, and having answered, so I turn once more to those who sneer at this my city, and I give them back the sneer, and say to them. So he kind of gives those critics a sneer back, okay? For criticizing his city, he gives them a sneer back, and he says, come and show me another city with lifted head, singing, so proud to be alive, and coarse and strong and cunning. Okay? And so he wants us and encourages the reader to see this roughness, this as part of the kind of excitement and liveliness of the city. And so even though he agrees with all of the things that he's saying, he's saying, yes, but this is what makes the city great, okay? It's part of the excitement. It's part of the liveliness of the city. Now, also in these couple of lines that I have read, we have what is called polysyndeton, and it is using the conjunction close together. I know there's a better definition in your reading notes, but it's using several conjunctions in close succession. Okay, so in that line, come and show me another city. Towards the end, we have this example of polysyndeton, and it's so proud to be alive, and coarse, and strong, and cunning. Okay, so that is an example of that. Moving on, we have flinging magnetic curses amid the toil of piling job on job. Here is a tall, bold slugger set vivid against the little soft cities. So here we have two more examples of different, what I'm going to call figurative language. We have parallelism, which is keeping words like in the same grammatical form. Okay, so here we have the phrase tall, bold slugger, and a little bit after we have little soft cities. So those are parallel phrases because they are both said in the same grammatical order. Okay. Then within those two phrases, we actually have an antithesis, which is parallelism with contrasting elements. So notice that those two phrases, although written grammatically similar, they are contrasting images. Okay, tall, bold slugger against a little soft city. Okay, so that would be an example of antithesis, because we've got that contrast of the boldness against, the soft. Okay, the tall against the little. Then we get into some other examples of figurative language, which are similes. And so similes, remember, compare two unlike things using the words like or as. So in this next line, we have fierce as a dog with tongue lapping for action, cunning as a savage pitted against the wilderness. Okay, both of those phrases, fierce as a dog with tongue lapping for action, that is an example of a simile, as well as cunning as a savage pitted against the wilderness. That is another example of a simile. And these similes are creating this vivid image of Chicago, kind of as this fierce dog or a cunning savage. Okay. Now we're going to get into the one-word lines, which hopefully are going to, again, kind of mimic that thumping, drumming rhythm, okay, from the first stanza. Bareheaded, shoveling, wrecking, planning, building, breaking, rebuilding. Okay, so hopefully you heard that kind of thumping or drumming a little bit more maybe than what you heard it earlier. Okay. Let's see. Under the smoke, dust all over his mouth, laughing with white teeth. So before I get into this last part fully, let me just say that this last section of the poem is going to represent an extended metaphor, okay? And we're going to talk about what it is a metaphor for here in a little bit, but this is going to all kind of represent a metaphor. So, under the smoke, dust all over his mouth, laughing with white teeth. Under the terrible burden of destiny, laughing as a young man laughs. Laughing even as an ignorant fighter laughs who has never lost a battle. Bragging and laughing that under his wrist is the pulse and under his ribs the heart of the people. Laughing. Laughing the stormy, husky, brawling laughter of youth, half naked, sweating, proud to be hog butcher, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads, and freight handler to the nation. Okay, so here this extended metaphor is of the city laughing. Okay, it is it's comparing the city to all of these other people who are laughing or who would laugh or whatever. So once you've read the poem and you've answered the comprehension questions, hopefully you'll have, well, I don't know if I should say hopefully, but maybe you'll have a different view of Chicago, especially as it was written about. This was written about Chicago around 1914. Okay, so what Chicago would have been like during that time, and so I think that it's important that even though he does acknowledge all the disreputable parts of Chicago, I do believe that his goal in writing this was not to point all of those things out, okay, because he does and he agrees with them, but then he comes back to kind of defend them. I think that he wants you to appreciate that at this time, Chicago was very intense and industrial, very tough. It was fast-paced. It was urban. There were lots of people living there. And it was filled with very hardy people who were working and active, and they were doing very rugged jobs. They were building, they were making, they were very physically demanding jobs, okay? And you know that it is indeed a husky kind of city of big shoulders, okay? And so for all of the things that are negative about it, I hope that you focus on the positives that Sandberg is trying to bring to light in the poem, okay? Excuse me. So I think that's about it. I hope that this video has helped you. If you still need some help with it, just send me a text. Let's see, on Monday when you turn in work, don't forget I'll need your textbooks, and that includes this poetry book and the little reader that went with it. I don't know. I feel like there was something else I was going to remind you about. Oh, memory work. Make sure that you're staying on top of memory work. I apologize for not having it on the sheets, but I know I've sent a couple of texts to remind Mom, so hopefully you're sticking with it. So I'll need that on Monday as well, okay? Next week, you've probably seen we've all just included some kind of fun activities. I hope that you decide to do them and that you'll give them a go and have some fun with it. And thank you for your hard work. Thank you for sticking with this and always giving me your best. I really appreciate it. I know this has not been easy, and it makes me really sad that we can't finish the year out together, but I hope that I'll see you on the 22nd at the little parade thing that we're doing up at Grace that Friday morning. So anyway, have a good rest of the week, and if you need anything else, please let me know. Otherwise, hopefully I'll see you next Friday.